SPL Book Talks. This week we are focusing in on Halloween books and other Halloween literature. I'm starting off our little chat today with a favorite book of mine, Practical Magic. This is also one of my favorite movies. I love this movie. So the movie has Sandra Bullock and Nicole Kidman in it, and it's very, very good movie. And that made me really want to read the book. So my sophomore year of college, I checked out the book from the library in Geneseo, which is where I go to college, and I also got the audiobook out, and I would listen to it constantly while I was driving. And it was October when I was listening to it, so it was so nice. It was so good to listen to, because this is one of these books that if you read it anytime it's not fall, in my opinion, it's just not as good, because you need the fall ambiance for this book. I reread it sometimes because it's good, and honestly, it's not that big. It's a pretty short book. It's about 300 pages or so, and it depends kind of on the version that you get, because there's several different versions of this book that have been released. So this book is about a pair of sisters who were cursed because of their, I think it's like their great-grandmother. They like trace their lineage back to like Salem witches. So, and they're living in Massachusetts. They're not living in Salem proper. It's not like Hocus Pocus. Their grandmother was cursed because she fell in love with a man, and her mother was just totally not cool with that because of their witchy like family style. They wanted to keep her home, and they didn't want her to go places, and so she fell in love with a man, and so her mother cursed her. And after that, all of the women in the family line of the Owens family are cursed with, every time you fall in love with a man, they will inevitably die. And they don't know how. It happens differently every time. But the book starts out with the sisters and when they were moved to their aunt's house. Now the aunts, love the aunts. The aunts are still practicing witchcraft, and a lot of people believe in the town that they're witches, but they say they're not. But we know they are. And they have like 10 or so cats, and Alice Hoffman, the author, goes into each and every one of the cats, what they look like, their names, and it goes through, how the girls are sort of outcasts because of their aunts. And then, it goes on later and later in life. And so we've got Jillian and we've got Sally. Jillian, who is the Nicole Kidman character, is generally she's a stubborn woman who does her own thing always. And she doesn't often think about the consequences. And Sally is the exact opposite. So this is one of those books of like a pair of sisters where the exact opposites. And so Sally is older, and she takes care of them for a while because their aunts don't really take care of them. So Sally has to sort of step up to the plate. And what's interesting is Jillian takes on like a lot of lovers throughout her life, like high school through college, but Sally doesn't do that. But Sally ends up being the one who falls in love with somebody. So we know how that goes. I would say a couple of differences from the movie and the book are there's a lot more lead up to Sally's romance than in the movie, because Alice Hoffman takes a lot of time like really laying out for us the history of the family and all of the hardship that Sally and Jillian endured after their parents died and they were dropped off at their aunt's house at the ages of like 6 and 4. So it's very witchy. It always gives me great Halloween vibes, and I think it's really good. There are a lot of people who say that they don't necessarily like the book. They like the movie better, which I understand, because there are some things about the movie that are just more fun, because this book is a lot more serious, I think, than the movie. But it's not so serious that you get bored, and there's just something about Sally that makes you want to keep reading because you want to know what happens to her and you want to know how she deals with, because for a while she completely just ignores the witch part of her life. Like she ignores that history. But it's inevitable when Jillian calls her one day when they're adults and she's like, hey, I need you to help me with something. I'm not going to say what because that'll spoil it. But Jillian calls Sally out of the blue, and like Sally is just thrown back into this world of witchcraft. And it's a wild ride. There's a lot of twists and turns. There's a one or two really good plot twists. But if you're looking for an easy book that is definitely Halloween themed, fall related, this is a good book. This is a good book for you, and it's a good starting point, I think, because it's not like a horror book, like Stephen King, but it's it has its moments. So
I know that I've not read the book, but I've seen the movie many times, and I enjoy it a lot. It's a one of those go-to, like if it's on, I'll just watch it because it's fun and it's I don't know. There's and the cast is really good in it, and I think you talked about Sally being the serious one or the one and the one who doesn't really want to be a witch. Basically, she's kind of divorced herself from that side of herself, and then but then she's kind of pulled back into it because of her sister's situation with her boyfriend. So it really gets it gets kind of crazy, but it's really great, and there's a good romance in it. It's really good. It's really nice. So I highly recommend it too. I'm with you.
I've
Oh,
also only ever seen the movie, but just a heads up for everyone, there is a prequel coming out.
no,
Actually, it just came out that we are going to have in the library. I bought the audiobook and we have the book, and
ooh,
it's called Magic Lessons. And it actually is their ancestor back in Salem during the witch trials. So it sounds good.
nice.
I've been
Yeah.
waiting. I've been waiting for you to announce that, Megan. I'm like, I want that book so badly. And if you're getting the audiobook, I'm like, yes.
Yeah, it sounds really good. I'm excited about it.
So, speaking of Stephen King, I think Megan, you're going next, right?
Yes. So I'm a big Stephen King fan. And I think probably the most appropriate for Halloween would be It. So that's what I'm going to talk about. It, it's also probably one of the scariest I think that he's done. But basically, it is the story of seven, I think they're preteens, maybe teenagers. Um, we go through them being teenagers in the 50s, but then there's also, we go back and forth between the 50s and when they are adults in the 80s. And they live in a small town in Maine called Derry. And they talk about in the 50s, they're being basically terrorized by this thing that they don't know what it is, and it's called It. We find out that it's basically an alien, I guess you could say, an alien slash monster, I would say. And it's been there for a very long time. I believe it was from an asteroid crashing on Earth. I believe that's how it got here. And it basically hibernates for 25 to 30 years, and then when it awakens, it feasts on children for about a year before going back into hibernation. I know it's it's creepy. So the really scary part about it is that it can shapeshift into anything it wants, and so it preys on the worst fears of its victims and changes itself into whatever they are most afraid of. And the reason for that is it says that children taste better if they're afraid when you eat them. Just, an interesting concept. But basically in the 80s, the characters are all adults and they decide to come back home because they realize that this alien has come back to life and is now killing children in the town again, and they want to stop it. So it's a really interesting book, in terms of going back and forth between when they're kids and adults and how it's really affected them their whole lives. but also just the idea, I don't know, something about the idea of this creature that you don't know where it is and you also don't know what it looks like at any time, I think is just terrifying. And I know a lot of people have seen the movie and then also the mini series with who is it? Tim Curry? I think so. But I would say I would definitely recommend the book too, because I think the book is in many ways creepier, but depends on, I guess, your viewpoint. But yeah, it's really good. It is scary. It's long too. The book is very long, but I definitely recommend it if you're into anything creepy, anything scary. You know, it is very creepy though. So
Am terrified of those kinds of things. So Stephen King is not my favorite just because of that. I think he's probably a great writer. Obviously, many people read his books, and he has a ton of them. But I can't. I don't know if I could read that. I'd be scared, and I have not seen the movies because I'm a big chicken on that. So
yeah.
I love horror movies, and this book has been on my list for a very long time because I've seen the original, I've seen the miniseries, I've seen also the new ones that just came out recently, and I think it's really, I didn't know that the book was written like both of the perspectives, because the way that they do it in the new movies are they tell the first portion of the story where they're children, and then they tell the second portion of the story. And also the dates are different. You said 50s and then 80s, whereas they switched it to 80s and then modern. Um, or I guess like today, like, present. Um, so that's really interesting. And I've been, it's on my list. And a lot of Stephen King books are on my list. Like, I would love to read Doctor Sleep, and I would love to read The Shining. Because I've
Both
seen a lot of
also
his.
really good.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, okay. This just like cements it in my brain. I need to read this book.
Yeah, and the book came out in the 80s, so I think that probably when they redid the movie, they wanted to make it more modern, but yeah, that's why the 80s. So yeah, The Shining is also a favorite of mine. I just think in many ways, I mean, the movies are great of his books, but I also think the books are really worth reading. The
There's
books are
something
great.
about horror books that is just, I feel like it's always 10 times scarier than the movie because you are free to imagine whatever you want.
mhm.
Whereas with a horror movie, everything is right there on the screen for you. And you can't, you can sort of imagine, but you can't really go anywhere else with it. Whereas, like, and especially with a book like it, where the thing can shapeshift, is like you never really know what it looks like, and you can make it your worst fear, which is like really really like crazy and creepy. So yeah,
I think
that's
I think the best horror movies are the ones where you don't really see the monster, or at least for a very long time, because that is what's so scary is your imagination, and what you think it is much more terrifying than probably in the end what it is. So, I mean, I think there are some of the most successful movies you really don't see the monster, or you don't see very much of it, or you don't see it until the very end. Um, and that to me, those to me are the kind of scary movies that are the best because they're the best quality in the sense that they really do what they're supposed to do, and that's to scare you. So, and play on your fears and all of that. But yeah, The Shining, I've seen both of those movie versions of it. Um, Creepy on both of them actually. In some ways, the newer, was it a TV series, I think, or a mini series type thing? That one in some ways was creepier, but of course you can never forget Jack Nicholson and in that role either. So in the original, so very cool. Yay. All right, Miranda, let's lighten it up a little and we'll do something a little less scary.
So I'm not really into the scary stuff either, like Colleen. So I picked something a little bit lighter. This is a middle grade novel, but I read it and I liked it. It was kind of fun. It's called Ghost Squad, and it's written by Clarabelle Ortega. So it kind of reminds me a little bit of like the Ghostbusters, but they kind of infuse the Dominican culture into it, which makes it pretty interesting. So the main protagonist, her name is Loosely, and I think she's like a preteen, so she's a middle school student, and she and her father live in Florida, and her dad runs a business where he tells ghost stories. So he does tours around town about different local legends and stuff. And his business hasn't been doing well, so they're worried that they could potentially lose their home. But also, in addition to that, in Dominican culture, there's this myth that your loved ones will come back, their spirits come back in the form of fireflies. So Loosely can actually see a lot of her descent, like her predecessors, in the form of fireflies. And she gets to interact with them and she talks to them, but something is going on with them and some of them are starting to fade, and she wants to figure out why so that she can protect them. So her best friend, Sid, helps her, and Sid is kind of unique as well. Her grandmother, there are a lot of rumors that fly around her grandmother that she's a witch and that she's part of this old coven of witches. So they find some clues in her friend's grandmother's house. Her name is Babette. And they go in search of this spell that raises the dead, basically, because they're hoping that this spell will help the firefly spirits. But it doesn't work. It backfires on them, and all of these evil spirits are released. So that's where it kind of turns a little bit more like Ghostbusters. But, you know, it has like a little bit of moments where you're like, there's a lot of like anticipation as to like what's going to happen, but it never really gets like super scary. So it's still a pretty light read and it's fun. So if you don't like the heavy horror scary stuff, I recommend reading this.
That sounds really cool, actually. I like that story.
Yeah.
I love the firefly piece of it. What a cool thing.
Yeah, that was what originally kind of attracted me to the book, because I was curious about that part
Yeah.
of their culture and how that was a myth, and it just sounded so cool.
Yeah, I love that. I love fireflies. So so it's not really scary, but it'd be great for middle school kids, it sounds like. I mean, it sounds
Yeah.
really good. Is it a series or?
No, it's just the one book. It's a standalone.
Okay.
So,
That's great.
yeah.
I love it. Okay. Justine, I think you're the next one up.
All right. So, going in the opposite direction from that, the book that I'm talking about is You by Caroline Kepnes, and our library doesn't have a copy of it right now, but there are a lot of them in the system that you can check out. So, You is about a guy named Joe Goldberg who works in a New York bookstore. And one day, this woman comes in and he sees her and he is just obsessed from the beginning. Like, he looks at her and he's like, I love you. So she's going around picking on her books, and when she goes to pay for them, she hands him her credit card and he memorizes her name from the credit card. So then when he gets home, he starts looking up everything about her, like where she went to college, her family members, her best friend's name, like everything. And he starts pretty much stalking her. I mean, he goes to her house when she's not there and looks through her computer, because she's just a struggling college student, aspiring writer. So obviously, why would she like lock her door, you know, whatever. And he goes through her laptop and finds out all this stuff about her because everything is online, and, you know. And one night he discovers that she is going to an open mic session at a bar to read some of her poems. So he follows her there. She's reading her poems. Nobody likes them. So she gets sad and then gets drunk at the bar. And he's watching her the whole time. But obviously he's not going to tell her that he's there because that's weird. So he sees her leave. She's totally drunk. She tries to take the subway home and she ends up falling onto the tracks. So he like shows up and saves her magically. And then they start kind of like this friendship / relationship thing. I don't know. He obviously is 1,000% committed and she barely knows him. And that makes him upset because he wants her to be 1,000% committed as well. But he feels like her friends and this one guy that she has like a fling with are getting in the way. So he uses his own methods to take care of that. And it's not really Halloween related, but it's pretty scary. So, and there's a show on Netflix. They turned it into a show. There are 2 seasons right now, and there's another season coming at the beginning of next year, and it's very good. There are only like 10-ish episodes per season, but they're all like an hour long, so it's a really good watch. And I really like how the show kind of, for me personally, the show kind of showed what I was already picturing in my head, like back to the whole It movie versus book thing. I liked because what I was imagining kind of lined up with what the show looked like. So that was good for me. And it's really good. And there are a lot of twists and it's creepy and uncomfortable. And I like it.
I just like, I knew there was a show and I knew this was a book, but I have never wanted to even go anywhere near either of them because this is one of my like worst irrational fears.
Yep.
Like, I don't even want a man on the street to look at me, let alone like I rarely, if ever, want to be perceived by another human male. Like, so the fact that it freaks me out too much. But also I've heard some really good things, so it makes me sort of want to like read it and watch it. I don't know, like, I don't know. Monsters I can deal with. Like, serial killers I can deal with, but like something about like stalking is like too much. It's too much.
Yeah, and the creepiest part of the book is that the reason it's called You is because Joe refers to the woman as you instead of her name, which just like insinuates that he is connected to her from the get-go.
Wow.
Like, he refers to her as her name sometimes, but throughout the book he's just like, you look really pretty today, and that's what makes it even weirder because it's all in his head.
Wow.
Well, there's that, but also I feel like that sort of, it takes away somebody's identity when you don't call them by their name. So, I mean, based on what I know about it, I wouldn't be surprised if he was doing that specifically, not even just because of like that's how he was originally thinking of her, but literally to like, even though he's obsessed with her, distance himself from her because of how it ends.
To me, the scary part of it, and I think this is why it's scarier to Marie, is that it's real. Like, these kinds of things can happen. I mean, when you talk about monsters and aliens and stuff, it's scary, but it's not necessarily, you can say, okay, but that's just that's not real. But somebody, stalking you, that's a pretty real thing. I mean, that can happen. It happens all the time, as we know. Oh, creepy. That's
Right. And I really like how I like when books and TV shows handle it in a realistic way. Like, because sometimes you'll watch a movie and this guy will like kill all these people, and then it's like, where are the cops? They're nowhere. Guess I'm not gonna get caught for this.
Yeah.
And like, I know it's a movie or whatever, but I like it when it's more realistic. And this book and the show are really more realistic because it's not like this guy's just going around like being creepy in the middle of the day and like no one's gonna see him. They make it realistic. There are cop confrontations. That's what makes it even more creepy, is because it really does and could happen. So
wow. I don't know if I'd read that or not. I don't know. I might watch it though. I mean, honestly, the show sounds really interesting. I mean, the story
really good.
itself, so I might watch it. Who knows? We'll see. So for the last one, I did something classic. I'm going to do Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula. I read this a long time ago, and I did not reread it for this, but of course I know the story pretty well, and I think most people know the story pretty well. Um, uh, it's but it's really interesting, and the guy who did the introduction, his name is George Slade. He was a professor of English and comparative literature at Columbia. So he's, he kind of knows what he's talking about when it comes to writing and all of that. So it was really interesting. His introduction was really good. And what I realized, and I know I've known this, but I just really came to a point when I was like kind of researching it so we could talk about this today, is how much this is really represents the repressed society that Bram Stoker wrote this in, So it represents, sex and lust and the forbidden, and I think that it's appealing because it appeals to the repressed parts of us, the things that we don't necessarily, want everybody to know about or even are conscious of, there's things sometimes that you don't even realize that you like or whatever. So in the introduction, his quote is, "Dracula, the undead, is a composite of the buried life we desire and the moral death that is the punishment for unearthing it." So I thought that was a really good way to start out the book. Bram Stoker he was born in Dublin in 1847. He was like one of 7 kids. His mother really was kind of a little bit of a feminist of her time, and it's interesting because the books, he throughout his life he lectured and stuff on feminism, but then he did a full turnaround and wrote some things in here that are just not very feminist at all. So it was that was very interesting, I thought. But the story itself, I mean, it can be very creepy. I think reading it, I don't think that I found it super scary like It or something like that, but it's creepy and it makes you think about things and people and the way people, I don't know, bring out their inner thoughts. There's been some great movies, many movies, versions of Dracula and variations of Dracula. I mean, in 1921 they did Nosferatu, which was probably the first, and that was kind of creepy. I don't know if I've ever watched that. I mean, just the fact that, first of all, black and white movies add a creepiness because of the shadow effect and all of that. So, and he's an ugly monster, and so in the beginning, he's this ugly monster, which in some ways I think is not really the intent of Bram, because of the way Dracula draws you in, as he seduces you. He becomes what you want and then draws you in and, into his lair, so to speak. In 1931, they did the Dracula with Bela Lugosi, and that one was in some ways kind of campy and not as scary, but there was an attraction, and they really tried to play up his eyes as like mesmerizing you somehow and seducing you and bringing you in. My favorite is the 1992 Bram Stoker's Dracula with Gary Oldman. I thought that Gary Oldman brought to that part the reality of Dracula, in the sense that he really understood. He got inside that character and really understood him, which is Gary Oldman's thing anyway. He's very good at that. But that was the one where I really went, oh, I understand Dracula. I understand. And he felt human almost. You could see his regret in turning her into something that he's become, that he doesn't like anymore. That to me was like one of the best things about that. And it just filled out the whole Dracula universe for me. So, so I, of course, recommend Dracula. I mean, I'm a vampire fan in general. I read a lot of vampire books, movies, or see a lot of movies. But this is a really good one to start with, because this is the base. This is the original. This is where it all comes from, where we got that idea from. So of course, we have it at our library, and I'm not sure we have the movies, but I know we have definitely have the books. So
We
um,
have the 1992 version with Gary
I
Oldman.
thought we did. I thought we
Yeah.
did, but
It's
yeah,
over in
that
the classics section.
yeah. And I don't. I think I don't. We probably should have the 31 version. It seems like, but I don't know if we do. But somebody probably does because it's so classic. I mean, that's like you said, like we said, this is classic. This is the basis of the whole genre of Dracula and vampires. So, um,
I love Dracula. A couple of years ago, my mom and I saw at they do this theater festival in Ontario on the Lake, up in Canada,
yeah,
and they did a really really good rendition of like a new play that's been written from Dracula. And what's really interesting is they included, and this isn't something you might necessarily think about, but um, people of color like heavily in the dialogue, and they talked about the like social classes of people of color, and that's just something really interesting to think about that might maybe like Bram Stoker might not have wrote about, but it would have been present when he was writing.
yeah,
And they made the woman he ultimately turns into a vampire, um, a woman of color, and like that was part of the commentary on like these whitewashing of like stories like this. And it was very very well done. It was a great play, and it was I had I love the Gary Oldman movie, and I love Gary Oldman. I love Winona Ryder, but I had a similar moment where I would like the aha moment of, oh, I feel like I actually like I'm not just watching Dracula, or I'm not just reading it, like because I've done that, but I understood it. Sort of like how you read a Shakespeare play and then you actually see it, and it's like, oh, okay, now I understand it.
yeah.
I had a similar moment. But yeah, Dracula is a great book. It's a great, great book.
Mhm.
I think this is one of those ones that we all know the character, but so few of us have actually read the book. Same with Frankenstein.
Yeah.
We all know, I think a kid could tell you if you showed him a picture of Dracula, but how many of us have actually read that book? I haven't. I haven't read Frankenstein either, so not the originals. So
Mary Shelley.
yeah.
I love Mary Shelley, so I read Frankenstein purely for the fact that Mary Shelley's wonderful. And she was like, the origin of sci-fi, and people don't talk about it, and I wish they would. But Frankenstein's another great book that everybody should read.
Yeah. I
Great book.
considered that one, but I haven't read it and I didn't have enough time. So, of course, I know the story and I've seen several of the movies, but yeah, yeah. But I think that that was the thing about with Frankenstein. I remember, even in the original movie that I saw, the old one, um, I really felt for the monster so much. I really got inside him. I just felt so sad for him because he was just a victim of, what had been done to him. So it's just, yeah, I love that story too.
I will say though, I'm going back to Frankenstein for just a second. If you read the book is very different from all of the renditions
Mm,
that they've made, like movie adaptations. I think there's maybe only one Frankenstein like that even comes sort of close, and Robert De Niro is in it, and Kenneth Branagh is in it,
I remember that.
and that's a good one. But they sort of went a little crazy with the notion of Frankenstein's monster and appropriated it. It's just like how most of the time when we think of Frankenstein, we're like, oh, the monster, right? And there are a lot of people who just call Frankenstein's monster Frankenstein because they don't know Dr. Frankenstein is
Right.
like the. So anyway, I'll stop talking about Frankenstein now. I love that book. It was really good.
Well, that's good. That's always a good recommendation while we're doing Halloween books. So okay. Well, this was good. I think there's certainly lots out there for Halloween. If you want to get your scare on for the season. We've got several. Obviously, these are available at our library or mostly available at our library, or definitely through the 4-county system. So come on in and check them out. And next week we'll be doing movies, Halloween movies. So we'll all have picked out something fun or scary or something. So thanks for coming. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you at the library. Bye.